Can your orcs bring home the bacon? Hello, everyone. Bront, CatHerder here. We're having some fun talking Raid Shadow Legends, and we're continuing on with my DERP through Faction Wars series. This time we're talking about the Orcs. Now, the Orcs faction is honestly one of the least exciting factions. I'm not a really big fan of a lot of the champions here, but there's definitely some interesting challenges and definitely some champions worth looking into. So, but before we break down the different factions, let's go take a look at derping, because what does derping mean? Derping is my method of doing damage using enhancers, revivers, and protectors. It's about building a team that contains DERP. So your damage, your enhancers, your revivers, and your protectors. Bring everyone with, build a team, know what they do, and make a team that is smart and it'll be able to get through faction wars. So let's go take a look at the champions of various levels and see what we can do to break it down. So the good news, bad news with the Orcs rares is really not too much here to talk about. None of the Orc rares really bring a lot worth mentioning other than Galek. Galek, being one of the starters, is one of the highest damage rares you're going to find. Is fairly easy to build. He even has a little bit of decreased defense, so you can consider him an early enhancer, although it's a random 4-hitter, which is very, very difficult. He is probably the worst starter because that random low end decreased defense is just not that useful compared to either more damage, additional AoEs, powering yourself up, or doing poisons compared to the other starters. But he's still one of the starters. So if he was your starter, you're going to be building him probably to 60 anyway, and you're probably going to be using him in campaign. So overall, he's usable in Faction Wars. I don't think I would count on him being in your end game team. I don't think I'd count him for 21, but he can definitely bring some damage early. And even if you just pull one randomly, he's not a bad champion to bring around for a little while to use for a bit until you don't need him anymore. Good news for the orcs is the epics are a different story. There's a lot of really, really good epics in here. There's a lot of different opportunities for you to do something cool with the epics. So from a damage perspective, you've got Ultimate Galek, who can provide some burns and actually can hit fairly hard as well, do a lot of damage. Zargala is a pretty decent damage dealer. She also has a decreased defense as well. It's not a 100%, but it's a pretty solid decreased defense, and she does absolutely smack. Bloodfeather can be built for some damage, although it's more single target damage, not particularly great. Duck the Pierced is one of my absolute favorite epics in this faction. He brings decreased defense, decreased attack. He hits very hard. He can bring decreased accuracy as well. And he even has a small provoke that can provoke 1 to 3 other champions. Only one of them you target, and then 2 others at random. Makes him unkillable as well. So it's a pretty decent provoke. He's also a defense-based champion. So not only will he hit very hard because you need to build him with full crit, but he's also very tanky as well. So I actually recommend Duck for this faction. He's a damage dealer, he's an enhancer, and he's a protector. Another damage dealer for the orcs is Seer. Seer has a max HP hit that is powered up by being able to eat buffs either on your own team or if you have enough accuracy on the other team. She can be a great damage dealer. She's one of the best wave clears in the game. Definitely worth building. Building for accuracy means that she'll also put people to sleep if she does not kill them, so she can be decent for some control as well. And she actually hits pretty hard on her A1. Definitely worth building if you can pull one. Tuhawk falls into a similar category. Tuhawk doesn't quite do as much damage as Seer does on the waves, but he brings decreased speed. He brings a turn meter steal. He brings some additional survivability as well. He also brings some lockout ability with his A1. He is a very well-rounded epic with damage numbers similar to some of the legendaries in this as well. He is a great champion. I really like him as one of the damage dealers because of the extra utility and protection he brings to this as well. And then finally, Sandlash Survivor can be built to do a decent amount of damage. She also brings some additional protection, similar to how Duck brings some good protection and Tuhawk brings some good protection with a decreased speed and turn meter steal. She brings an ally protection and a increased defense, as well as unkillable on herself as a reaction to if your champions take a little too much damage. So she also hits really hard and does some buff extension as well. So she's actually a pretty good epic all around to build. As far as enhancers are concerned, I mentioned Duck. He does the decreased defense. Jorg and Tagore both can bring some additional turn meter boosting, so they can be very, very valuable as well. And then Seer can strip buffs, which is great. There are 3 epic revivers. You've got Shaman, who is a early login, not particularly good. In fact, you may have noticed that several people don't actually have Shaman as a daily login because they've been replaced by some of these better logins that you get instead. Honestly, don't invest in Shaman. If you get her, she's an okay reviver very early until you get somebody better. And honestly, it's not that hard to get somebody better at this point. Jorg and Tagore are very good champions. Jorg brings the increased speed, the increased attack. He's got kind of an Arbiter light style kit with a revive as well. Overall, pretty good kit. Even brings some burns if you need them. Tagore brings a little more healing and protection compared to Jorg, but he also brings them the turn meter buff as well. I like Tagore a little bit better as an all around reviver protector, but Jorg and Tagore are both very good. Having at least one of them on your team is very, very helpful for Faction Wars. Then finally, Vrask is a really weird champ to build. Vrask has a passive where he heals some chunk of his max HP if he critically hits on any of his attacks. So what you want to do is you want to turn off his A2 because on his A1, he gives himself turn meter boost. So he will go more often if all he's doing is A1ing. He'll do a decent amount of damage, not great, but a decent amount of damage, and provide huge heals every time he attacks. And if you can get him in counterattack gear or revenge accessories as well, he'll have a chance of going even when he just gets hit, which gives you extra healing and survivability. I really like him for this faction. Although now with Tagore, who also brings some healing, Vrask is not as required as he used to be. Trumbor is another protector. Trumbor brings some big shields, some big ally protection as well. Overall, he's a decent champion with a decent kit, but I think I'd rather have a Tagore and a Vrask than a Trumbor myself. Orc Legendaries have come a long way since I had to deal with the faction. Orcs used to be one of the factions where you had to count on the epics because the legendaries were not very good. That's not really the case as much anymore. Not a lot of the orc legendaries are amazing, but there's a lot of really good utility in there now that there didn't used to be. We'll just go through them in the list and take a look, and we can talk about them individually. Grohack the Bloodied is very much like Tuhak, where he provides some of the decreased speed, he provides some turn meter steal, he does a decent amount of damage. He used to be a very, very bad champion. He's now significantly better. Even unbooked, he can provide a lot of utility in Faction Wars. If you have Tuhak, Grohawk is basically a slightly better version than Tuhawk without some of the survivability bonuses. Grohawk will do a little more damage. Overall, very good champion for Faction Wars. Has a few uses in the game. He's not the best champion, but he's got some good uses. Kreela is one of the better ally attackers in the game, or at least she used to be. She also has a big AoE nuke and some additional buffage as well. Kreela is a great champion, well worth building. Tila used to be absolutely terrible. Tila is now an absolute goddess in the Orc faction. She brings burns, she extends burns, she brings hex, and she brings continuous heals. And she can also steal buffs with her A1 as well. So she's got a great kit, very helpful in supporting you, very helpful in keeping you alive, very helpful in doing some damage as well. Well worth building if you get yourself a Tila. Danig, I'm not super thrilled on, but he provides a little bit of protection because he provides some decreased accuracy. He can provide some turn meter control as well, but I just really don't like him. He hits okay as well, but he's not a great champion. I wouldn't invest a lot into him. I'd actually rather have a Grohack than a Danig. Artak is a great champion. He's really good for a lot of endgame teams. He's all AoE, brings burns, ignites the burns, brings decreased attack. Very flexible, very useful, very easy to keep alive with his max HP hit. Robar can be a top tier arena nuker. He's a little bit conditional with some of his damage, but overall he's a very good damage dealer and a very good nuker. That's all he is, however, so do keep that in mind. Gomlock is a Doom Tower champ. He's one of the harder ones to get. He's the 3rd legendary, so you're not going to be getting with him when you're dealing with Faction Wars. King Garag is an arena-focused nuker who honestly I don't like. His damage numbers are similar to Grohawk and similar to Tuhawk as far as his attack values and his multipliers. He has some additional things that make him do more damage, but all he is a damage dealer, and he's an arena-focused damage dealer that doesn't have a place in arena because there's so many champions that do it better in arena. So I really don't like King Garog. I would advise against investing in him, but if you happen to have one and you're early on, maybe you build him enough to do damage at 50, or maybe he happens to be the best nuker on your account and you build him as your arena nuker till 60. Nogdar's got some interesting use cases. He's got a really weird kit. He can hit fairly hard. He brings himself back to life, but he's very situational. You got him, you build him. I don't think he's a great for the faction wars. Iron Brago is a great champion. Iron Brago gives you increased defense passively with his passive. So he gives you approximately 10% of his defense gets assigned to everybody on your team. That's huge for keeping you alive. He also does decrease attack, he does increase defense, he does a provoke, and he can actually hit fairly hard as well as a defense-based champion. Very, very good champion for faction wars, very useful for that. Useful for some early clan boss teams as well. Worth building. Varl the Destroyer is the champion you get after Gomlock in Doom Tower, so we're not going to worry about him. Jag Bonesaw, decent damage dealer, but certainly not great. Warlord is one of the best champions in the game if you're looking for a lockout control champion. He does a huge turn meter drop, although it's not 100%. He does a complete lockout of all skills, so he's very good for control. He also has a big heal and a big shield that also includes block debuffs. So he can be very good for protection and control. Very good champion, will help carry you through faction wars if you happen to have him, even when his lockout abilities don't lock out bosses. Angar just recently got a buff. He now does a little bit more damage. He's a decent provoke champion. Not great, but he now does enough damage that he's worth possibly building because of that, plus the extra control that he has on his AoE. He can get a 2-turn provoke out, which makes him pretty good. Raka is a reviver in this faction. She is Duchess Light, I guess is one way to describe her. She has these really big shields. They're huge, great for protection. She has some cleanses and block debuffs, and she has a AoE revive. The problem she has is her AoE revive will trigger even when she doesn't revive anybody. So if you're not manualing, Raka is not the best reviver in the game for your team. If you are manualing, then Raka can be great. Finally, Supreme Galak provides a bunch of burns, provides a bunch of block debuffs. He can hit really hard. Supreme Galak is an absolute beast, well worth building as well. So let's go take a look at the boss. So the orcs get the purple boss, one of the more difficult bosses. This is the health swap boss. This boss can be difficult for most factions because most factions struggle to do damage. Orcs don't struggle to do damage anywhere near as badly as other factions. So generally, if you bring enough damage, this boss should be fairly easy. The bigger problem is making sure that you stay alive when he does the health swap if you can't kill him before he does the first health swap. So that's where having a reviver, or even two, as well as healers, can be very helpful. This faction is probably one of the easier factions to do this boss with. You bring a good chunk of damage. There's plenty of damage dealers in this faction. As long as you can keep yourself alive, the purple boss shouldn't be a big problem for you. So we go through my recommendations here. We can recap who I've been talking about and where they kind of slot. As you can see, there's a lot of damage dealer options. There's really not a lot of enhancement. There's actually a good chunk of revivers compared to other factions, given there are 3 of them in the epics. And then actually a decent amount of protection here as well. For my sample team, as I mentioned, I really like Duck the Pierced. I think he is great to anchor your faction around. Obviously, if you don't have him, Zargala can be a bit of a substitute on the enhancement category. Zargala is a lot squishier than Duck, however, so that makes that a little more difficult. But both of them are decent champions. And in fact, I've seen Duck and Zargala both be brought in as decent damage dealers and the decreased defense, and can be very helpful. Beyond Duck, I recommend taking 2 of the 3 of Jorg, Tagore, and Vrask. Jorg is great, but doesn't provide any healing. Tagore provides a lot of healing as well as the revive as well. Vrask provides an unlimited amount of healing, but doesn't have any of the revives. Jorg still does provide additional increased attack, which can be very helpful. I like Jorg, I like Tagore, I like Vrask, and I think 2 of those 3 will carry you. And if you want to go for all three of them, then you're probably not going to die and you just need another damage dealer. Finally, I really like Tuhok. I think Tuhok brings a lot to the table with the decreased speed as well as these tier meter steel. He can help an awful lot against the boss because slowing down the boss can make the purple transition a lot easier. He can also help against the waves because slowing the waves down means you don't get some of the debuffs or buffs that come up there are as much of a problem. If you can't get Tuhok, honestly, just about any other damage dealer is fine. And then you really have a flex spot. So if you feel you need more protection, you can bring a little more protection. If you want to bring the double enhancement with Zargala, for example, you certainly can. If you've got a legendary or legendary slots right in there with a bunch of other epics. But honestly, you don't really need a legendary in this faction. This faction's got a lot of damage and a lot of good epic champions. The legendaries are decent, but very few of the legendaries here scream absolutely need to bring. And as I mentioned before, you don't need a legendary. I didn't have a legendary. I mean, I did have a seer. My seer was built fairly well. As you can see, she did a ton of damage, and that helped quite a bit. Duck did a ton of damage as well. I mentioned I like Tuhok as a damage dealer. You'll also see he didn't do a lot of damage, but that has more to do with the fact that I had Seer and Duck nuking things from orbit, and Tuhok wasn't even 6-starred. If I wanted to 6-star Tuhok, I absolutely could have, and it would have helped quite a bit. Jorg 6-starring wouldn't have been a big deal. Vrask 6-starring would have helped with the healing quite a bit. As you can see, he carried with a lot of healing as well. Carried this team and kept them upright for the most part. And Jorg was there for the revive in case I needed it. Overall, it went fairly well. I said this took 10 minutes, and I was definitely manualing it. But with a couple of extra 6-stars, this would have been no problem, and I probably could have done this on auto. So hopefully that gives you some insight into how you can solve the orcs. Hopefully it's easier for you and you have the right champions for it. And hopefully this video has helped. So appreciate it all. If you get a chance to smack that subscribe button and like, I much appreciated. Till the next video, I'm Bront CatHerder.